And now to Sri Lanka and two views of this week's historic declaration that the bloody 26-year civil war between the Tamil Tigers and the government is all over, bar the shouting, of course, of which we've heard plenty in the days since. But where to from here for that savagely divided subcontinental island nation? Nirmala Rajasingam is a Sri Lankan Tamil activist and writer living in exile in London. In the 1980s, she was the first woman to be detained under Sri Lanka's Prevention of Terrorism Act. And in 1990, her sister Rajani was assassinated by the LTTE, the notorious Tamil Tigers, for her outspoken views. Given her almost contradictory personal background to this week's momentous shift, Nirmala's reaction has been, to say the least, mixed. I spoke with her from London. Nirmala, thanks for joining us on what is a momentous week. Asia's longest-running civil war, we're told, is now over. But as a former member of the LTTE, a former Tamil Tiger adherent, reading what you've written, you seem to have mixed feelings because you don't feel very, very affectionately towards either the Tamil Tigers or the Sri Lankan government.
I think when I heard the news of the defeat of the LTTE, I felt a sense of relief simply because I knew that the war had come to an end, and also the continuous killings of Tamil dissenters, Tamil democracy activists would stop.
Including your sister in the
past. That's right, including my sister and so many others, very famous ones and not so famous ones, unknown ones who were, community activists, who had been murdered by the LTTE. I realized that now this will come to an end now. And of course, we can start organizing our lives in the sense the Tamil people can start organizing their political lives in a much better fashion. Secondly, at the same time, I'm very, very apprehensive about the future because the current government, the Sri Lankan government, has mobilized Sinhala Buddhist nationalist opinion to prosecute this war. And of course, with all these, as you can see in Colombo, with the celebration of the defeat of the LTTE, well, fine, okay, people can celebrate the end of a war, but I'm anxious as to whether it's a bit too jingoistic, the kind of celebrations.
Your family past in this whole civil strife is intriguing. Your sister, as you say, was gunned down by the then LTT leadership. You were the first woman, as I understand it, to be imprisoned under the government's protection against terrorism, prevention of terrorism laws. Now, that's very unusual for you to hear you saying anything decent or reasonable about either side in this.
That's right. I was detained under the Prevention of Terrorism Act, kept in solitary confinement for 22 months. I was at that time a sympathizer of the LTTE, but when I escaped from prison and I joined them as a full-timer in Chennai, I realized that they were a really ruthless military organization, devoid of any progressive political values. And I began to notice that there were internal killings internal killings within the movement, and that the leadership was planning, killings of leaders of other groups, etc. And I realized that that I couldn't stay there anymore, and within 6 months I left. And I was, of course, since then have been very critical of the LTTE. So I have been persona non grata with the Sri Lankan state as well as the LTTE for many years.
But you don't believe that this military victory against the Tamil Tigers is the way to solve this problem?
Well, no. Basically, what it is that, this conflict began long before the LTTE was born. It is a political problem. It is a political problem. It's a problem of democracy, democratic governance, about how minorities are treated, how the Sri Lankan state is a majoritarian state, and it discriminates against its minorities, and it has been for decades. And when the minorities challenge it, as the Tamils have, they respond with violence. They have responded with violence through the decades.
So do you trust the government when the leadership is saying that they have liberated Sri Lanka from terrorism by this military victory? They are now talking about democratising the entire nation state of Sri Lanka. Do you really believe after 25, 26 years of non-stop conflict and fighting, terrorist acts, responses from the government, that this government really does mean that they are going to include Tamils in any Sri Lankan democracy?
I am rather apprehensive. I am worried. I am anxious as to whether they will come out with a sufficiently democratic and inclusive process to discuss the ethnic conflict. I hope they do. The other very serious problem is that for the last 3 years, there have been a horrendous number of abductions, extrajudicial killings, disappearances, exclusively targeting the Tamil community. If the government wants to make this peace a real one, a sustainable, long-lasting one, these violations have to stop right now. And for instance, you know, the surrendered LTTE cadre, we need transparency. We need to know how many people have been taken in, how many people have been taken away from their families for rehabilitation. We need to know what happened to the 3 doctors who have been detained. You know, this has to be transparent and has to be put in front of the Sri Lankan public and internationally.
Could it be a test of the genuineness of the government's attitude if someone like yourself was able to return to Sri Lanka? I guess I have to ask you, who would you fear your life might be taken from you by? And could you go back? Could you go back? Will you go back?
I will. I would like to go back. I have returned for nearly 22 years, I didn't go back. I stayed only in the south, in Colombo. The LTTE was the greater threat, definitely. The LTTE was the greater threat. I knew that if I went to the north and east, or the east, I would have been finished off.
That's a tragic irony, that the people you supported were the greatest threat to your life.
Absolutely. They told us, well, you do not have the right to do politics. You have to stay, you have to keep silent. You either do politics under us or you don't. So that is how they took away the voice of the Tamil people. Now, of course, the Tamil people have to rethink how they are going to continue their campaign for their democratic rights. Of course, armed struggle is completely out of the question, and I don't think there will be a return to armed struggle. I think that whole phase is over, and secession is out of the question, and Tamils have to publicly disavow any connection they have with secessionist notions and win the confidence of the other communities. And that's what will be good for the Tamils for the future.
Nirmala, thanks very much for your time, and I hope that your aspirations and your hopes become a reality.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.